The attack on Marye's Heights began in the early afternoon of December 13th. Contrary to popular belief, though it was December, and though it got very cold at night, the afternoon temperatures reached somewhere close to 60 degrees that day. And so as the tens of thousands of Union troops poured across the pontoon bridges and began their assault up the hill, they threw down a lot of their winter clothing, their coats, their blankets, things they would desperately want later that night when they found themselves stuck on the hill, not being able to retreat, not being able to advance. We're going to primarily look at the battle for Marye's Heights from the Confederate perspective on top of the hill. But wave after wave after wave of Union brigades went up that hill that day. And by the time it was all said and done, 8,000 of those men in blue lie dead or wounded in front of the stone wall on Marye's Heights. Let's go take a look. We're walking along what is known as the Sunken Road on Marye's Heights. This is the stone wall behind which the Confederates, lined up 3 or 4 deep, would just reload and pass guns to the front, reload and pass guns to the front as the Union, wave after wave, brigade after brigade, came up this hill. Unfortunately, between 1890 and 1930, the town of Fredericksburg grew toward the west and eventually filled much of what was Marye's Heights, to where now you can't see any of the field on which the Union fought. The only thing that remains of the battlefield that looks like it did back in 1862 is this stone wall. To my left, over this way then, up the hill, is the National Cemetery. I'll try to give you some of the landmarks as we walk toward the center of the Confederate line. Behind me would have been the right, and then down the hill is in this direction. There's just very little that you can see that resembles the battlefield as it looked in 1862. At the time of the Battle of Fredericksburg, the stone wall that ran along the sunken road was 500 yards long. It's modeled today by wall that has been replaced, but this part right here near the Kirkland Monument is original to the battlefield. They ask that you don't touch it or even go near it, but this is the only remaining original part of the stone wall here. And you can see that unlike the rest of the wall, the earth comes right up to it. It's such a great natural defensive position, but as I mentioned earlier, once again you'll notice it's not a steep incline from down to the river to here. There is a spot where it is steep, but it's down further. So there was a lot of flat ground right here, and you can just imagine what easy targets the Union soldiers would have been, though it's impossible to see it today. We'll come up to this road and give you a better look. You can kind of see the slope of things. But what an incredible defensive position this was. I'm trying to stay back and honor the request not to go near the wall. You can see there's a piece there that has fallen off. Here you can get a sense of the slope. But then beyond those homes at the end of the street, there does seem to be more of a drop-off as you head into town. I'm standing now at the site of a memorial to Brigadier General Thomas R.R. Cobb. Fredericksburg was his first battle as a brigadier general in charge of a brigade. And he had been a politician, a brilliant lawyer before the war. And he actually grew up. His boyhood home was in Fredericksburg, down the hill on the other side of town. And an artillery shell crashed into a house that once stood here just across the road. That artillery shell exploded, and on the spot where the monument is, it drove a piece of shrapnel into General Cobb's thigh. He died a few hours later from that wound. It wasn't said at the time, but years later it was claimed, I don't know if it's true or not, that the shot that mortally wounded General Cobb was actually fired from the area near his boyhood home. This is the view the artillery would have had. What an incredible position again. You see the stone wall down in front between us and the parking lot where the men would have been. And the artillery could sit up here and fire right over their heads. You can just imagine, don't want to imagine, what it must have been like for the Union soldiers coming up that hill. Behind me is a statue to Sergeant Richard Kirkland of the 2nd South Carolina. He's known as the Angel of Marye's Heights. For 2 days, Union soldiers lay in front of the stone wall. And one of the things you'll notice is that it's pretty flat here. It's not a steep decline. And so they were right here, just in front of the stone wall, laying here for 2 days, freezing, wounded, starving. Just a horrible scene. And the cries of the wounded men, the cries of the men who were here, crying out for water, crying out for help, they got to be too much for Sergeant Kirkland, who asked for permission to go over the wall and aid the enemy soldiers. He was told no. He asked again. This went on for a little while until he finally talked to, I believe it was General Joseph Kershaw, who was his brigade commander. And he was told by Kershaw that if he wanted to take his own chances and go over the wall, he could. And so that's what Kirkland did. He said, I'll take my chances. He grabbed some canteens and he went over the wall. Started bringing aid to the enemy soldiers. Well, at first the Union soldiers started to fire on him because they thought that he was looting the bodies of the dead, which he wasn't. Once they realized what he was doing, they actually began to cheer for him. And this went on for better than 2 hours as Kirkland would go back and fill the canteens, come back, did it as often as he could. He's remembered today as the Angel of Marye's Heights. It's a good reminder that though men may fight in a war against each other, that does not mean that they have to hate each other and they have to lose their common decency for their fellow man. Unfortunately for Sergeant Kirkland, he went west with Longstreet's Corps in the late summer of 1863, and he was killed at the Battle of Chickamauga.